Welcome back to Corporate to Crypto. I'm Ryan Dennis, your host. Here at ICO Alert, we love connecting with local businesses in and around Pittsburgh, and who better to interview than a professor of University of Pittsburgh's Katz Graduate School of Business. Today, joining me, very special guest, Paul Harper. Dr. Harper is actually a clinical assistant professor of business administration at the Katz Graduate School of Business at Pitt. So his principal activity at Katz is to include research and course development in the areas of entrepreneurship, strategy, and business ethics. So, Professor Harper is actually interested in understanding the social and economic forces that continue to challenge the flourishing of U.S. domestic minority entrepreneurs. And I am obsessed with his work because he's actually developed key stakeholder relationships between several schools at the University of Pittsburgh and within substantial innovation clusters in Western Pennsylvania, now including ICO Alert. Let's get into the conversation between me and Dr. Harper on social entrepreneurship and turning ideas into innovation and impact here in the United States and abroad. I'm very excited today to bring a very special guest, a friend of mine, and a true flag bearer for innovation and social entrepreneurship around the entire city of Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh professor, Dr. Paul Harper. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, it's interesting. It's weird to be called doctor. I mean, we've been talking about this stuff and have certainly become friends along the way. And so I'm very happy to be here. And thanks so much for inviting me here to talk a little bit about how I got into this space and innovation in general, but all the great things going on here in Pittsburgh. So I'm really happy to have ICO Alert here in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, we appreciate being in a city that's got such great innovation with regard to the universities that are having such a great impact with the students and the future leaders of our country. I think that University of Pittsburgh's reputation stands alone, and I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey into just how did you land at University of Pittsburgh? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into becoming such a renowned business professor.
Well, it's interesting. It's a long journey, so I'll give you the short version. But I was born in Seattle, right? And so I think that explains a lot as far as that, and had the privilege of being around kind of the explosion of Microsoft back in the day. My family came out there in the 40s. My great aunt was the first African American employee, in fact, at Boeing. And then I left Seattle and had the opportunity to study at Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee. Studied ethics in the Divinity School at the University of Chicago and worked my way around South until I ended up doing an MBA and a PhD at the University of Virginia in management. And I tell you, along the way, I've always thought that my special niche, and it might be the Seattle, sensibilities that I have, but that I've cultivated. But ultimately, I've always found that my special niche was to look for opportunities to play a brokerage role. All right, where within business, I always felt like I had a privileged access. That's where a lot of the decisions are being made about resources, who gets them, who don't, who gets into the different networks that are going to be valuable. And we know how valuable networks are, and in some ways, ICOs are putting a number on how valuable networks are. But I always felt like my role in some ways was more of a Robin Hood role, more of a way of being exposed, and even a part of developing and new technologies and kind of the implementation of those technologies. But also thinking about how the spillover effect, how the benefits of these new technologies and all of this innovation was going to have an impact in the places that need it most, right? Which, if I'm here in Pittsburgh, not in the Oakland neighborhood, which is amazing, by the way, but also in Homewood and Hazelwood, and even thinking about some of the suburbs and some of the small towns along the Mon Valley, who are all giants during the Steel Age, but haven't really had a chance to connect with the new innovation that's happening in the Pittsburgh area. So I've always seen myself that way. People ask, how do you connect divinity and ethics, right, with business, right? They always think that those two things, and I don't think that that's the case at all, but I do think that there's special work and a lot of work where one can bring value in making sure that as we're moving forward, as society is moving forward technologically, and as a people, we're coming to understand our needs a little bit better. I think that there's a place in playing the brokerage role and creating that value outside of the mainstream. Right, that's one of the things that excites me about the conversations you and I have been having, and just starting to think about as somebody who teaches entrepreneurship, social entrepreneurship, strategic management. So I'm doing that on a day-to-day basis, both here in Pittsburgh and around the world. But starting to think also about the impact that some of these emerging technologies that are blockchain based, what sort of impact they might have too. And the last thing I'll say, I know I've been talking quite a bit. I'm a professor, so I apologize.
The show's about you, so go ahead.
Yeah, I tend to go into lecture mode, but just to kind of tee up a little bit too. But I also think what's important as an innovation professor is that I'm kind of scanning the environment and making sure that I'm bringing into the classroom the things that my 18 and 19-year-olds really want to know. Right, a lot of business is really built on kind of the tried and true wisdom that the retiring executive has. But in the innovation side of the curriculum, a lot of it is about exploring and experimenting and thinking about the stuff that retiring executive doesn't even know exists yet. Right, and that's where I tend to kind of hang out a little bit more, and so once again, that's why I'm kind of excited to be invited into a larger conversation about these emerging blockchain technologies and how they may disrupt those best business practices and some of that tried and true wisdom.
I love the broker analogy because you're kind of speaking to how who you are as a person and what you like to do kind of intertwines with your purpose, your larger purpose, and then that's what divinity is about, right? Your larger purpose. And that's where business, unfortunately, capitalism itself is intertwined into human nature. I mean, we want to be cutthroat and make as much profit as we can, and and get as much money out of our employees as we can. But we also need to treat them with respect. We also need to do work that is important to society and brings value, or else you have no value as a business. And so cryptocurrency, blockchain, this whole space is really about kind of creating and then legitimizing different kinds of value, almost out of nothing from certain standpoints. And so I'm really curious about, based on our conversations that we've been having about networks and network effects, I'm really curious about, how we can kind of share with our audience, some of our conversations that have been about networks. I think during our first conversation, we chatted a little bit about how did you get into crypto, right? If you're going to do a show like Corporate to Crypto, I'm really expanding on the journey of how people even got into here. But the real question is, like, everybody who started a cryptocurrency company or a blockchain-oriented company or a technology company, what kind of access did they have to information, to the internet, to different, finances, to capital raising in order to create a technology company, in order to be able to illuminate, different business practices with cutting edge tech? It's a really, really interesting journey that everybody has gone down in order to get to these places. So for somebody to actually reach out and reach back to the youth, to young people, or to disadvantaged people and say, hey, this is out there, this is happening now, and you can be a part of this, you can play a role in this. That's such a huge role, because otherwise you're only going to have people from the same network consistently building these systems of power and then using them to, uplift themselves and their family and their network. So how do we expand the network to get better and more ideas and diversify it and be inclusive and all that kind of stuff? So my question to you would be, where would we be without the inclusivity and the network effects of people who are reaching back out? So when you look at other people who are doing these brokerage and bringing out these ideas to the world, who are the people that you've seen across I guess the larger world of blockchain, cryptocurrency, that you see as great people who kind of represent the kind of work you want to do, or companies that you see that are doing the work that you'd want to do?
Yeah, so I'll stick to my industry, which is higher education. So as I was listening to you, I was thinking about a study I was involved with as a doctoral student underneath Professor Greg Fairchild at the University of Virginia. Great professor. And what we were studying, this is going to go right to this network effect issue and where this term brokerage comes from. What we were studying at the time was how venture capital, or we were trying to understand a little bit more about how those minority-owned firms, or more minority-operated firms, who were actually lucky enough to attract, I shouldn't say lucky, but they attracted funding from venture capitalists. Like, who were the folks who were able to do that? Because that's not a very common story. And we know venture capital to be a very elite, and private equity more generally, to be a very elite network. right? And so we wanted to figure out who they were. So I was lucky to be on this study. Now, this is where I kind of learned about networks, which have closure, brokerage and closure, right? One of the ways that one has value in a network is that you can bridge between a couple different networks. But the other part, of course, is closure, that you're holding the benefit of being in the network to those who are members. And so one of the things that we learned is even minorities who are operating within those spaces tended to be from the same networks. They went to the same schools, they were from the same alumni organizations, came up in the same neighborhoods. One way or another, they still had an elite, even though they were minorities, racial minorities, they still had an elite story to tell that helped to explain how they were able to get on the radar of a venture capitalist, let alone to actually receive that kind of funding. And so while it was great that I had a chance through this study to get to know a lot of the really kind of important and pioneering, in this case, African-American principles at venture firms across the country, it was also a reminder of just what a high wall some of these networks actually have created. And now that the blockchain conversation, at least once again, I want to say something really important, which is that I'm a business school professor. I'm not a professor in the computer science department. I'm not in engineering. So in the business school, in lots of ways, a lot of this information is just coming in. Most of my colleagues don't talk about blockchain, or if they do talk about it, it's because they've heard of the latest pump and dump scandal. And that's the only thing that's interesting to them. So I wouldn't say skepticism, but there's just a lot of ignorance on our side of things. And so as I've kind of gone around and started to dig into this a little bit more, what I like is that I feel like the democratizing effect that potentially could happen in these distributed autonomous organizations. And just the way that that's structured, it's a more philosophical question, but it does provide an opportunity even at the ground stage to think more directly about inclusion. The fact that you're asking that question while this form is developing, rather than it getting all the way out there, and then we have kind of the encrusted structure of those who have benefited from it. And then at that point asking, well, how do we do something that's socially responsible? Mm-hmm. Right. What's exciting to me is the fact that it seems to be, at least from my vantage point, an already fairly diverse conversation. It's bringing in stakeholders from all over the place, globally, right, across class, across networks, and it's asking the impact question early on. That's the hook for me. That's the hook for me. And it's not just the hook for me. What I'll tell you is it's the hook for my students. So even my business students, when they come in, social innovation is one of the things they're most curious about. The idea that a business school or the business platform, business skills, whatever, can be used as an opportunity to not just make money, but also over and above that, you got to make the money, but over and above that, to actually make an impact on people's lives. That is something that our students, our young students, really care about. And I think that makes them a little bit different from their predecessors. And so I have to meet that demand too. Mm-hmm. That's part of my pressure, right? And so I'm part of probably the network of professors, right? I don't need to name drop a bunch of folks, but just a bunch of professors who are really thinking about how to better serve the interests of their students by being in these networks. Right? Understanding these networks a little bit better. And frankly, hopefully getting to a point where we can help our students participate in these networks. This is what they're excited about. What you're doing is what my students are excited about. What I was doing at their age, they couldn't care less about. and one has to be humble about these things, yeah.
So I guess I sort of posed the question, what are some companies or some people who are doing that? Inherently, it's educators who are brokers of this information and can shine light on where these networks are. And the next step is, how do we keep these educators up to date with the latest and greatest in blockchain technology? Some of the fine people here at ICO Alert and I have been going out to different universities, Edinburgh, Carnegie Mellon, and obviously Pitt, and discovering conversations with these professors that they're having trouble keeping up just like we are. I mean, I guess everybody in blockchain is having trouble keeping up. And the next step is, how do we get our students and the future people of the society to actually hack into these networks and say, hey, I'm here and I'm playing a part now? Because when you're speaking about the minorities who have joined into these networks, yeah, they're there, they're present, and they reap all the benefits. How do we all reach back out to the youth and give them the better tools to provide that real value. And I think the value thing just across the board in crypto is becoming more of a big deal with social impact, because people are frankly getting bored of just a hedge fund of funds and, how do I make dividends and create the first decentralized ecosystem marketplace for blah, blah, blah. It's all about what's the point? Where is the money being made, and who's gonna benefit from this? So even something like CryptoKitties or a video game, well, actually people love video games. It helps them get away from their day-to-day lives and escape. But there's also platforms where we've seen some ICOs where people have even had little piggy banks for children to learn how to invest at a young age, and little things like that where people can actually see, well, this is educating the youth and helping them. And I guess as a professor, you really got into, I guess, from divinity to business to really shine light on the youth. Am I right in saying that?
There's some of that. I actually ran a great program. I should mention the LEAD Summer Business Institute. It started at Wharton like maybe 40 years ago. The University of Virginia had it for like 35 of those years. I ran it for 7 years. It was a high school program. Some of your listeners probably would have even participated in it, but it's a high school program over the summer. It's residential, and we had a chance to kind of give them a mini MBA curriculum. And so I really enjoyed that. And frankly, when I was with them, it was my experience as a director of 16-year-olds, not 24-year-olds, not 28-year-olds with the average age for MBAs, but of 16-year-olds, really was a wake-up call. I wish more people, particularly more of my colleagues, had that experience, whether it be at Virginia or at Pitt, because it'll show you what they care about. It shows you how they operate and how they communicate, how important the image is versus the word. It's a different world. They got me onto Facebook. They got me into social media. You know what I mean? Like I had to follow them a little bit, and it changed the way it kind of turned upside down the way I now teach and kind of program things. What I will say is, to the point that you were making a minute ago, I think that students are actually looking and excited again about ideas, even business students. And that might be a shock to people. Even business students are excited about ideas. I was at a conference that we hosted at CATS 2 weeks ago. I had some of the best researchers in the world. It's an entrepreneurship conference that Professor Sharon Alvarez put together. And probably the biggest theme coming out of it was about the importance of the imagination. Who would have thought that this would be the big topic in a research conference at a major business school? That there's something about humanity, there's something about the heart, there's something about purpose. Frankly, there's something about meaning and the processes by which we make meaning, right? That these are all kind of coming back, I think, in a big way. So as much as some of the training has become more vocational, as much as we're talking about experience-based learning, and that's very important, I feel that there's a groundswell underneath that where, to the point that you were making earlier, where people are like, okay, I'm interested in the experience as long as it's meaningful, right? As long as it's meaningful. So the experience has to be packed in something larger for folks to give it their best effort. And I think as professors, we see that all the time. We have to make our curriculum meaningful for the students. We can't just convey information. As they think about careers, as they think about who they want to be ultimately at 30 years old, not what job they want, but who they want to be. All of these things bring purpose and meaning back into the conversation, and challenging students to think about themselves in that way. And young persons, I don't care if they're 12 or they're 16 or 20 or 28. This is something that I think is really kind of the imperative of the professor as mentor. And at Pitt, we take that very seriously. We take that very seriously. Our Associate Dean, Audrey Morell, she's actually a very established scholar on mentorship and thoughts about how to bring that, whether it be colleagues and executives at a corporation, but also the way faculty should relate to students. So I think because of that, right, and because of that background and the way we operate, we have to think about enabling our students' dreams, desires, and imagination through emerging technologies. We have to take games seriously. Gamification seriously, not just as a marketing, but just as a way to allow folks to access a different part and to be and to exist in a different way. And I think that's part of the dream here that we're trying to create. This all seems somewhat abstract when we're thinking about this, but when we're talking, and I think about what I've been doing with thinking about blockchain, virtual reality and augmented reality, thinking about Internet of Things and 5G, thinking about 3D printing, thinking about all these disruptive technologies that are around. What's great about them in a classroom context is challenging students to think about what use cases that they can develop, where they can use these technologies to do something real. That's what turns on the lights. That's what turns on the lights. And so it's exciting to be in a context like this region where we're leading machine learning, artificial intelligence, where we're leading on so many of the emerging technologies that it's nice to be able to walk into the classroom and say, here's an article about something happening at the University of Pittsburgh or CMU or Chatham, all these great institutions. How are we going to build a business case around this? How are we going to commercialize this, right? And to be able to use that I think is a thing. What we need are more use cases. Mm-hmm. So from a teaching standpoint, I would say particularly around ICOs, I think that's probably one of the areas that folks want the most clarification on. Like how's it different from an IPO, and then what's the regulatory environment around it, and all these things. What we need are teaching tools, business cases, not the business case for ICOs, right? But like business cases, like a specific description about a real entrepreneur that chose the ICO route for a particular reason, and to have some logic behind why that was chosen and why that was a better method for seeking support, financial, social, whatever kind of support one was looking for. But we need more business cases. That's where I think we're really lacking. If business schools are going to play a larger role in bringing in, adopting, supporting, networking with folks that are operating within the blockchain space.
Yeah, if we want to create critical thinkers to change our world, we have to give them the power and the belief that their ideas can turn into impact. Mm-hmm. And you're actually... At Pitt, sounds like you and other professors and the dean as well are all trying to facilitate how can we use our imagination to actually, sculpt our imagination into business use cases. And with ICOs, you mentioned this is actually a platform, the ICO, where you can turn a wild idea into a capital fundraising behemoth in no time. And we actually had a report done by our intelligence analyst, Kyle Protho, recently, where he went around and tried to find out some great data about ICOs and what people think of them. And he found that almost 1/5 of Americans think that ICOs are illegal, just in general. And it's interesting because they are and they aren't. And that's not clear cut, and that actually hinders the innovation for people to do that. Because if you can't think clearly and freely about an idea and use your imagination because you think something about it will be hindered, that's actually going to hamper our ability as Americans to actually innovate and use our ideas and create impact with them. Mm-hmm. So in coaching your students about ICOs, I'd be interested in seeing, what they think about, if I wanted to start an ICO centered around, perhaps giving money back to my local community through fundraisers or selling books or, local, concerts or something like that, could they do it? 1/5 of them think that it's probably legal. That's actually 1/5 of great ideas that we really need. So we actually need to find out a way where we can actually facilitate the conversation about ICOs, the latest news, what's allowed and what's not, into our universities and with your students so that they can see what's happening abroad as well. Because in Germany just announced recently that Bitcoin is a form of legal tender. So if you're thinking about starting an ICO in Germany, if you actually can accept Bitcoin, you're actually thinking, well, my country is kind of accepting of Bitcoin and of cryptocurrency and blockchains and stuff like that. So maybe I should move to Germany to do my business. Maybe I can start my idea in Estonia. That is actually really impacting the way people are viewing where the United States is headed in the future. So how have you been coaching your students so far with regard to the regulatory environment around cryptocurrency, and how have you allowed them to see their ideas turning into impact?
So I would say fundamentally, so I'm surprised with the data. If it says 1/5 think that ICOs are illegal, I would wager, right, that most people don't know what an ICO actually is.
Yeah, that was
so
part
there's
too.
This other part, right, which is like, first of all, at least those people have even heard of it. And I think that I would say, frankly, that we're still at that early stage. At Pitt, in the computer science department, a student started a cryptocurrency club recently that's really modeled off the blockchain at Berkeley kind of movement that's out there, which is great. And so I get to advise them a little bit. But most of my undergraduate business students, if I were to survey them, they would not know what an ICO actually is. And so I think that's really the stage. We're at a stage where they don't even have an opinion on it yet. You see what I mean?
Right.
Which is good because at least they don't have a bad opinion, right? At least you don't have to unwind that. And I think I think over the summer, as I'm preparing to teach in the fall and try to incorporate some use cases into this, I think that's what I'm really trying to do is just raise awareness of the fact that this alternate way of funding, of thinking about networking, of thinking about adding value to networks, and thinking about leveraging networks, I want them to understand that that's out there. Why does that matter? As a business professor, particularly one who teaches strategic management, I always have to think about, while my students are in my school or even in my class, what distinctive competency are they actually developing? And I would love it if Pitt students and students from around the region were the students that companies were hiring that could help them with some analytics, right? But at the same time could be the ones that could introduce their managers or their directors to the possibility of using some sort of blockchain solution to solve an internal business problem. Do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Or to expose them to these networks that odds are their executives and their managers are not aware of. And to me, that gives them a strategic advantage when they come onto the job market. So right now, it really is just about exposure. It's about finding and telling good stories about the effectiveness, the use or the effective use of ICOs, right? Like I think that's the stage we're really at within the business school. They may be off and running in the engineering department, but with us, it's really about just raising that. Last thing I'll say about this is my business students they're going to go off and make decisions. I think this is actually a really important thing. The fact that business students don't generally participate in these networks is something that those networks need to think about. Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, the technicians are not the ones that are going to actually make the decisions. My students on the collegiate side, but also on the MBA side and on the executive side, they're going to decide within their companies whether they're going to invest in a blockchain initiative. They're going to make those decisions, whether resources will be dedicated to that, whether they're going to hire people that have that as a part of their skill set or tool set. That's the difference between having a business student involved with it versus having an engineering student involved with it or a computer science student involved. And there's some overlap there, obviously. You see what I mean?
Absolutely.
It's the leadership aspect, right? It's the leadership aspect and the decision-making aspect. And so yes, over the next year or so, that's when I think this exposure for me I really want to do. And I'm hoping to take students around the world to see, even if it's still quiet among the business students here in the U.S. or in the Middle Atlantic. If we were to go to Europe or we were to go to Asia, these currencies and just the idea of blockchain, this stuff is much more used, right? It's much more normed out there. And so I want to actually expose them to that too. So there's lots of different ways I'm thinking about it, but I just want to be honest that I'm at the early stage. I'm still trying to understand things about the space.
We all are.
You know what I'm saying? I'm still trying to, and it's moving really fast, but I'm still trying to, kind of have my academic sensibilities about that. And at the same time, learning it and being involved with it before it's all settled knowledge is exciting. Mm-hmm. There's so many things I teach where it's like we already kind of know how that story ends, right? So to actually be involved in something where the story is kind of unfolding right in front of your face, and you might even have the opportunity to leave your footprint, leave your verse in that story. I think that's the value proposition for being in on this fairly early as a business professor. Right, so I look forward to to continuing the conversation as that grows, as we're trying to figure out exactly where we can kind of make our impact. But I really want my students to be some of the leading students to be able to incorporate this into whatever else it is that they're going to be doing.
I love that. The way to bridge the gap between ideas to impact for your students is that exposure, and you're literally taking some of these kids around the world in order to expose them to some of those things. And hopefully ICO Alert and our connections, we can help you facilitate some of those.
I'll be depending on it. So we're going to talk about that.
Absolutely. And I think it's really exciting for us to know that Pittsburgh is really an entrepreneurial city, and the Midwest is a very entrepreneurial place. From the steel industry or to now, the vibe is still here. The vibe of let's start something big, let's do it. We're focused and zeroed in narrowly, laser focused on ICOs and security token offerings. And last week I went to the World Blockchain Forum in New York, and it was wonderful. It was great. I met a lot of service providers and people starting their own ICOs, and it would have been a great place for your students to walk around and see and be exposed to some of these wacky ideas that actually got chiseled and tinkered with and then became very valuable ideas to society and potentially game changers. So my question is, when can we actually get these students to see the now, the here and now, and let's see if we can get them to some conferences and see where people are even competing ideas against other ones and leveraging investors' opinions and what they're going to say on stage and going back and forth. And I would love to be a part of the conversation with these students, and meet them and get to know them, because their ideas, like you're saying before, about should we blockchain or not, should we ICO or not, is really the future. If you're looking at blockchain, you don't always need one, right? And we've been talking about that on and off about, do you need to have a decentralized ledger? Is that going to help or hurt your business? The best way to ruin a blockchain is to put something unnecessary in there. So we've been also talking about potentially getting some of these kids' ideas bounced off of each other, whether it be in a competitive way or an idea-a-thon way. So can you please share just a little bit about your plans for actually taking the kids across the world and stuff like that? And sorry for calling them kids.
Yeah, I know. I have that bad habit, but I'm old school. Yeah. So we're exploring the idea of taking them to potentially to Toronto, right? I mean, clearly we know that the University of Waterloo was it Vitalik Buterin, right? Like the importance of him to kind of developing Ether there. And because of the ecosystem there's a blockchain institute there. So we've been thinking about going to Toronto. And then also going into Switzerland, right? And Zug, it happens to be a town. It's like Crypto Valley, right? And really, really kind of looking at kind of the incubators that are there, where there's a lot of financial technology innovation happening around blockchain uses. And ICOs in particular, and research that's developing around that. There's been some talk about Germany because they've got similar kinds of capacity there. So this is what I mean. So one of the ways to really kind of hook the students is for them to see it kind of live and in action. Right, it's almost like going to the arena and seeing the sport playing out in front of you, and that gives you a different sense of what it's like than my lecture probably will, right? And so those are some of the plans that we're looking at over the next year or so. It would be nice to host a series of either speakers, people, entrepreneurs who've actually done an ICO, or even thinking about some sort of hackathon or something like, as you say, ideathon, some way to kind of get students in a room with somebody who has a real problem that's trying to make a real decision that's in the ICO space, and challenging the students to come up with the best way to solve that problem, whether it be about a process or where it be about an actual product or service. So I think that there's lots of ways to kind of get them with their hands in on it, right? And I think that that's where we've really thought about taking, once again, me kind of representing the business school at the University of Pittsburgh and all of the different networks and the processes that are involved with that, but also thinking about partnering a bit with ICO Alert and thinking about, well, you've got access to folks who are actually doing this, and thought leaders like yourself who are kind of studying and trying to understand a little bit more of the phenomenon more generally, and how can we kind of put something together over the next year that becomes regular, right? Because I think that'd be very attractive to students. And students, they're working on the underground. It's like the blockchain at Berkeley. That's all driven by students. If they were waiting around for faculty, they would still be waiting, right? And so it's like meeting the students where they are and doing it with some velocity. I think if we can put something together, the students are going to show up. And then we'll really see what we've got. Like anybody knows in innovation, until you get the experiment out there, until you get the folks in the room, until you design the program, you don't really know what you're dealing with. I bet that there's a groundswell there that we can tap into.
Absolutely.
That'll keep us energized, and that will bring out and stoke the energy around this right here in the Pittsburgh region. I mean, we see ourselves as world class, and we know we got the tech from a technological standpoint. We definitely are. So it's really about commercialization and the business process and building out the business cases. I think that would really solidify that story.
Yeah, ICOs are not going anywhere. security token offerings are becoming a thing here in the United States. But across the world, people are having ICOs. And ICOs have lowered the barrier of entry for people to raise capital in a major way. And it's leveled the playing field for somebody who understands marketing and technology and all of those things to be able to raise money without a specific network in a way. It's kind of supplemented the way that you can actually get into a network by saying, well, I can find a blockchain person in Russia to help me develop this, but I'm actually going to raise an ICO to help people here in Angola, or I'm actually going to be starting a business here in Pittsburgh. The spirit now is, how can we listen to the ideas of today and say, how can we use the mistakes we made in the past, bring it all together, expose everybody to what's going on around here, and bring out the best. And the cream of the crop to me is going to be those ideas that have created value already. I mean, just talking about planting trees is a cause that you're making, and it's a valuable idea. Just talking, and when somebody sees that you've raised $100 million to plant trees, that really that perks up a lot of ears and saying, well, that's a great idea. We should continue that train going. And people love to help people who are helping themselves already, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to see your students growing up into the business world and seeing that, I did a business case at Pitt with Dr. Harper, Professor Harper, and he told me, oh yeah, like if I'm going to do an ICO, it's got to create value from this perspective, and my ideas were valuable. And then they're going to spur that knowledge onto the next person. And being able to see what's happening in different countries where that regulatory environment is not hindering those experiences of those people who are starting new companies, whether they be young, old, blue, gray, whatever, is really important. There was an article in Fast Company about, are ICOs a way for women to be able to raise capital? And I've seen some other great research done by writers like Meltem Demirors and other people who've talked about women of color being able to raise money, raise capital for their ideas using ICOs. And that Fast Company article actually featured comments from us because they saw us as an authority on ICOs. And we said, hey, you're going to be able to flip the head of this financial system that has oppressed you because you know everything wrong with it. You know how you're not invited. You know how hard it is to get access. And that is actually going to make you a competitor if you do get access, because you're going to be able to lower the barrier of entry and get all of these ideas from people in your network that the other network has not been privy to. So to me, that's the next step. And we have about 5 minutes left. Please share what you're working on now, whether it be with Pitt or with Innovation Group, where people can find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, well, so I would leave with a challenge question based on what you just said, and the question is: so if say you use the example of African American women, and that there's the possibility that this could be a good platform for them to raise capital, that this would be a way for them to build out a network and value a network that doesn't have the traditional historical issues, right, and boundaries that have to be crossed on a cultural level. But to what extent are African American women being invited into the conversation? To what extent are and here in the Pennsylvania region, right? If that's the case for African American women, that's going to be the case for a lot of folks who might be socioeconomic minorities, ethnic minorities. There's lots of different ways to kind of think about who needs to be included in the conversation, and then go a step further and saying what sorts of activities are reaching out and making sure folks who could really benefit from this are actually in the conversation itself, so that this does not turn into just another elite conversation, right? Elite conversation conducted by academic and economic and cultural elites about poor people. Right? Like so that becomes, I think, one of the big challenges. As I stated earlier, I really thought that because we're asking these questions at an early stage in the development, we'll be in a strong position. And I'm sure there's plenty of people out there that are thinking about this and doing things about it. And it's important to identify those. As I look forward, I think that's kind of the hook, right? That's going to be really interesting as we go through it. As I go through it, right, is making sure that impact is felt broadly across race, class, gender, or whatever identity group that might be salient at the time, right? And in different locations, what constitutes a minority is very different things. I do research and I do work in Israel, and so I actually care about kind of the plight of Arab Israelis who many times are not connected to the mainstream economic institutions there. for religious reasons. And I do a lot of work in Russia, and there's lots of different things going on in the regions that aren't, where folks aren't connected, once again, to the mainstream there. And here in Pittsburgh, once again, there are those sorts of questions about inclusive innovation. And so I think a huge win in a huge way to congeal the interest of a lot of stakeholders in this town, mayor's office, county exec's office, to the governor's office, is being able to tell a story about these ICOs that shows that they are a mechanism for overcoming historical barriers and boundaries around identity. If one can do that, there'll be a lot of power and a lot of people in this conversation. But if this goes on, and I'm not saying it's like that now, but if this were to go on and be just another elite economic and educational elite conversation where all the Harvard and Stanford folks are taking advantage of this and nobody else can seem to get into the conversation, if this happens, and I think this was the warning for venture capitalists, but if this happens like that, then, who knows what we'll be saying a few years from now, but I think it'll be hard to get traction. Right. So I leave this conversation hoping and anticipating further conversations as the work you and I do together continues to evolve. But I leave with that big challenge for you, for me, also for your listeners, is like how are we consciously and directly making sure that we're including in the conversation itself and educating and exposing the folks who really could probably benefit the most. That's what I would like to leave with.
I'd love that. So I'll do an activity on my own personal behalf. I'm going to make a list of some of the go-getters that I know, people that are always bringing me weird, wacky ideas.
I love them.
I don't think that they're going to go anywhere, but, just the people who believe in their imagination. Mm-hmm. And I'll talk to them about ICOs. I'll talk to them about blockchain and crypto. I mean, I feel like this is the work I do, but I don't feel like my personal network really needs to be but I should talk to friends and family about, hey, if you want to start a business, have you looked into crypto? Have you looked into ICOs? Have you, so that they can share with other young people that they know and the other people that they know who are ideators that are passionate about the future of this world. I think it's really important that we invite everybody to the conversation. And I think that you've really shined a lot of light on that. And thank you for the work that you do. It's important work, like whether it's augmented reality, robotics, whatever the case may be, across the world. You're physically taking students around the world to give them exposure. All this is great stuff. Been wonderful to have you on the show. So I really appreciate it. You have any parting words for us about what you're working on or anything like that before we wrap up?
No, I think I've preached enough a little bit, other than just hoping that you invite me back and that we can talk a little bit more. In the future I'll be able to talk a little bit more about deeds done rather than just dreams that I have in this space. So with that, thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Everybody, that's Dr. Paul Harper, University of Pittsburgh, Katz School of Business. You can check him out at innovationgroove.com. He's got an awesome podcast series that he actually uses to lecture with as well. So stay tuned. We'll have you back. Promise.
Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Corporate to Crypto with Dr. Paul Harper of the Katz School of Business at University of Pittsburgh. He's honestly an expert to me. He's as smart as five people. I can listen to him talk all day. You can tell he's doing the groundwork, as well as some of the high-level thought processes on how to change our world using cryptocurrency, blockchain, and other cutting-edge technologies. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and remember to subscribe to ICO Alert, the only comprehensive, trusted list of ICOs and pre-ICOs. We'll be here waiting for you to do your own research. Check out My Portfolio, our new functionality on our site, and make sure that you check out the next episode of Corporate to Crypto and subscribe. And remember, as always, be a learn-it-all, not a know-it-all. Have the best day ever, my friend. ICO Alert maintains the only trusted comprehensive list of pre-ICOs and initial coin offerings. This Pittsburgh-based startup has grown to serve over 1 million users in less than a year. But how did it get started? Well, at first, the company was just an online tool for two brothers, Mike and Rob Finch, to keep a calendar of their favorite ICOs. After just a few months, the team has grown to over 14 team members and produced hundreds of ICO reports. These in-depth reports feature exclusive interviews and offer insight into past, active, and future ICOs. Head on over to ICOalert.com, meet the team, and use their game-changing My Portfolio function. Track your favorite blockchain projects. Become your own venture capitalist. Only at ICOalert.com.